Hi, welcome to Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri, and I'm here with Dr. Fred Gardefei, who is Distinguished Professor of English and Italian American Studies at Queens College, and also with Dr. Donna Chirico, who is Professor of Psychology at York College, and as of August 1st will be Interim Dean for Arts and Sciences at York College. Welcome both of you
Thank you.
to a new programming schedule, since this is the first of original summer programming with Italics. So we're here to discuss basically Italian Americana and all of its glory and all of its maybe not glory or whatever. Let's start with something I think that is very important and most relevant to what Fred, you and I had discussed a couple of months ago on this program, and that is Italian American Studies in the college curriculum. It has existed in various parts throughout the decades, basically at the undergraduate level, but now we have it at the graduate level as Queens, as we've mentioned. How important is that?
Well, I think it's just as important as having any other course from any other ethnic group. Until we can put everybody into one course and call it American Studies, we're going to need these breakout courses where people can focus on a specific subculture of American identity. And with Italian American Studies, we can, for the first time, begin to see things like organized crime, food, fashion, design, through a larger lens called Italian American culture, as opposed to seeing them in this kind of blown out of proportion focus as the more popular media presents it.
It's also an opportunity to right some wrongs. So if you have a course with a curriculum, people will have a chance to hear the correct history, the correct food, the correct fashion, as opposed to what they think Italian American culture is all about, as it's been watered down here in the United States.
My question was going to be, what can some of the Italian American organizations do? Let's make it a little bit stronger. What should they do, in the opinion of some, in our opinion? What should they do?
I, a long time ago, asked a number of organizations to put a ban on scholarships for 1 year, and it was really looked at as some kind of,
heretical.
Yeah, I was a heretic here trying to, what are you trying to do? That's what we do. That's what they pride themselves on, giving people opportunities to go to college. And I said, well, when you send these kids to college, you're really ending their connection to Italian American culture. First of all, they're leaving the family, which is where most people seem to get their Italian American culture. Then they're leaving the neighborhood, so if there's any residue of Italian American family that goes out onto the streets, they're leaving that. And they're going into this kind of assimilation mill where they're going to be more like the other people who go to school, as opposed to more like the people that they grew up with, which is fine. I'm not saying that we have to control how people are directed in their lives, but we need to also control the possibilities of enhancing pertinent values and pertinent aspects to identity through courses. This is what courses do at the university. They expand your sense of what's out there. They expand your perspectives of how to see things, how to look beyond where you're at and look deeper into things. And I think this is the one thing that Italian American culture really needs to do. So I think by either raising more money and helping to create these programs at the university level, or taking the money that they're already geared towards scholarships and putting it aside to develop programs so that when they do send these kids to college, for 1 year, if you took away all the scholarships, you'd probably end up with a couple of $1 million in New York, which could endow a chair immediately. Mm-hmm. And at some school, you would have forever a position in Italian American Studies. Then when you send the kids to undergraduate school and graduate school, they would have an opportunity to take courses that would connect them better to the organizations than just, here's your $1,200 check, go off and spend it on whatever you want at college. In fact, I don't think they let them spend it. I think they just send it to the school and they pay for tuition. So I think what they can do is get behind it in a material way. Certainly they're behind it in a spiritual way, but I don't think they've gotten a grasp around the importance of intellectual development in terms of personal identity.
But I think that there's a piece here that's also perhaps even a broader than Italian trait, kind of what I think of as a Mediterranean trait when it comes to philanthropy, which is you donate money for something very concrete. Okay, I'm going to donate money and we're going to build a hospital and our name will be on it. But then no one thinks about where's the money to run the hospital, how should it be run, what should be done. And I see the same thing in the educational system. You pay for a scholarship, you put a name on it, because that seems to be a very important piece here for these scholarships. And then you don't really think about, what, as Fred is just describing, what is the aim of this? What's the outcome? So I'm more interested in the other end, right? When they're graduating and moving on to master's degrees and doctoral degrees, that there has to be some kind of enterprise so that young people are steered toward going into Italian language, Italian American studies, or at least maintaining those connections, even in the fields they're in. I mean, my field is not Italian American studies, but I study Italians and Italian Americans in a different field. But no one ever said that to me. I never heard that. And it would be a wonderful way to kind of get people to understand that you can do things in your own community in other fields of study. So to kind of pursue it beyond the 4 years.
Yeah, and the alternative to that is to think that your background and your history and your heritage has no relevancy in the world today, and so therefore you cannot bring it wherever you go. And indeed you do bring it wherever you go. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not as overt as other identities might be, but it may slip out. You know, your Italian may slip out. And I was very conscious when I was a young student and young scholar, being afraid of my Italian. And it was that street background, that Italian American heritage was not validated in the university, so I thought it had no part there. This is what this is all about. We need to find a way to make people feel comfortable about who they are, and also to be able to complicate the idea of who I am. I'm Italian American. Why? Because I eat dinner on Sundays with my families, is what most of the scholarship applicants would say. But they don't understand that, or maybe they do understand, but they don't talk about the dynamics that go on beyond that. You know, my grandfather's there and he's telling stories, and my grandmother's there and she's giving recipes to this person, and you know, how all this culture is being exchanged under the guise of a meal.
But you're correct, because this, especially at that age, kids haven't worked through where this fits into their own identity. So they may just talk about the meal, but not go any further than that. They talk in similar ways about religion. It's kind of interesting. Oh, well, why are you Catholic? Oh, because I grew up in the Catholic Church. Well, but what does that mean to you, right? And then you get the Baltimore Catechism. Yeah. So it's the same thing. They don't have a deeper meaning of what it is for them, and that's something that needs to be inculcated as they move through college and are developing overall.
And this is something we don't study in the academy, and especially your field. Fred and I are more in the humanities, the literature, cinema, etc. But you're in the social sciences, but close to the natural sciences in psychology, and that's really not studied by Italian Americans, and it's not studied, and Italian Americans aren't studied as much by psychologists. It seems to me, it seems to be. I can think of Dr. Aileen Riotto-Sairi, who did work on ethnotherapy. I can think of Elizabeth Messina, who's done numerous articles, etc.
Joe Giordano.
Joe Giordano. But there are no big studies, no books. The book I can think of is Irvin Child, back in 1942, where he spoke about, you know, but that's 1942, but these book-length studies have these long, sort of in-depth studies have not been done in psychology.
No, there was one in the 1970s, but it was very surface level, you know, and it dealt more with the kinds of things you're saying the kids talk about. But now I have a project.
There you go. Yeah, and this, I guess, comes in with the idea of philanthropy, sponsorship, financial assistance, where the MA students and the PhD students, when you were speaking about scholarships, we should clarify, you were speaking really about those $1,000 and $2,000 scholarships, those $50 or $60 or $100, $1,000 and $2,000 scholarships that are given, which are great on the one hand, but on the other hand, if they're supposed to link back to Italian or Italian American culture, they probably don't, because the undergraduate going to blank university to study pre-med, what's the return on that, right, with regard to Italian American culture? One of you mentioned Italian, the language, in a number of things. So how important is knowing Italian?
Let me speak as someone who is not fluent in Italian. I think it is exceedingly important. And the more I get involved with Italian-American studies, travel to Italy, it becomes absolutely clear that this is an important way to truly understand a people, a culture. So I think that this is essential for any individual who really wants to go on in any field, or even more importantly perhaps, to understand themselves, their own culture, their own background. So I think that this is becoming even more important in a global situation where second language is now commonplace. Right? So it's not an embarrassment anymore. There's no guilt over the fact that you speak Italian at home. And I think that this is something that really has to be encouraged at this point in time very strongly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because we should mention we were just in Rome 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, and we were fortunate for those who aren't bilingual were fortunate because we were there with ILICA, Italian Language Intercultural Alliance, and fortunately the conference had translators both from Italian to English and English to Italian, but not many people know that, right?
But there's something that happens when your own words get translated by somebody else. Having had my words translated and having had been interpreted, I'm sure, is it loses your voice, it loses you, it loses this. And I think this is what's so important. I grew up thinking I was speaking Italian, and when I went to Italy I found out very young that I wasn't speaking Italian, so I went on to study Italian, and it has made all the difference in terms of being accepted. Only these last couple of years have I begun to teach in Italian and to speak at conferences and so on in Italian, but it makes a difference in the way you are perceived and the way you are received by Italians especially. And I think one of the things we need to learn is that as long as there's an Italy, there's going to be an Italian America. So the better we get to know Italy, and the better we mine that field. I mean, I believe that the future of Italian American identity has a lot to do with Italy, as opposed to just the past that we kind of preserve here.
Yeah, I agree. There was a wonderful moment at that conference when Fred got very angry at something someone said. He said, "Well, now I'm angry. I have to switch to English."
Well, Italian's not good enough to rant, yeah. Even though that's probably how I learned with the ranting of my parents.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the representation of Italians in the media, because this is even most recently with the death of James Gandolfini, while he was being mourned, and people were talking about The Sopranos, of course, which really put him on the map. Some people wanted to remind, some Italian Americans wanted to remind people about The Sopranos as opposed to just mourning the death of the loss of this guy's life.
I think one of the things we have to remember when we're speaking about this particular issue is that media today is drastically changed. One of the things that doesn't exist anymore is what I might call a national viewing of some television show or even movies sometimes. There's so much niche marketing of shows. I mean, there was a point in time where you knew on Sunday night everybody was watching Ed Sullivan, or you knew everybody was watching a particular show that, think of something, Gunsmoke, that was on for 20 years. We don't have that anymore. So the way things are portrayed in the media, we may not even be aware sometimes of the subtle portrayals that are going on in ways that are positive or negative. And I think it's a field where we really have to get a handle on what is being portrayed out there, how is it being portrayed out there, and in what format. Is it via computer? Is it via television? Is it via movies? I mean, it's something that's, I think, right on the cusp of changing very dramatically. And here I think of my own teenage daughter and her friends and see what they watch. And they watch Jersey Shore, and they are Italian Americans, and they think it's hilarious. They don't take it personally. They don't see that these are real Italian Americans. They see it as very camp. So one has to kind of be careful about who's watching it, how many people are watching it, where is it reaching. If it's just a bunch of teenagers, 13 and 14, watching it, that's something very different than a major movie that has an impact at a broader cultural level. So to me, this is an idea I've been grappling with lately, and how do you pull this apart, and where do you look, and how do you find the pieces that you want to accent and really kind of weed out the ones you want to get rid of. It's a tough issue right now, I think.
This also goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of Italian American studies. If everybody would be educated as to a full sense of what Italian American culture might be, then the stereotypes wouldn't bother people as much, I don't think. I think people have to understand that you need stereotypes in order to tell a story. This goes way back to all the folk tales and fairy tales, and that is the way knowledge was transmitted from one generation to the next. People understood they were stories and so on. What happens is that there is no alternative to these types of portrayals. And this is what the anti-defamation groups are fighting, but they're fighting it in the wrong way. They should be creating opportunities for young Italian-American filmmakers and writers and artists to get out there and present their materials so that people will have a good sense that it's much more than what they see. The stereotype is not, the problem with the stereotype, I believe, is not with the producer, but it's with the audience. If the audience looks at that and says, and if you look at what's going on in the media today, I don't think you ever see anything more than what used to be considered, well, working class culture in terms of Italian Americans. And this is something that Italian Americans are trying to separate themselves from, which I think is very dangerous, separating yourself from your working class background. But when that's all you see are these silly working class kids, who are actually probably middle class kids, acting like working class kids, using that as a way to make fun of something that other people take seriously, this is where the confusion comes in. And this is where I think had everybody been educated in grammar school about some of the aspects of Italian American culture, they would be less likely to try to either produce these things or certainly less likely to interpret these.
But you're right, and the real dangerous part is not the stereotype, because we do need the myths and the stereotypes. I think one of the reasons students, for example, have a very hard time grappling with somebody like Freud is they don't understand that in Freud's time, every student knew all the myths. And they understood them, they understood what the symbolism was. The problem happens not with the stereotype, but with something we call, in psychology, earned reputation. So what happens is sometimes the media will pick something that's a traditional stereotype, and then there'll be a news story to say, oh yeah, look, here's another Italian mobster shot in Brooklyn, or here's, another Irish guy drunk after the parade, and those things reinforce the real negative elements of those stereotypes. So that's where the media comes into play, and what is it that they pick up and highlight, because there are loads of positive stereotypes too. But the earned reputation piece is the one that gets to be very dangerous.
Well, the goal is to recognize a stereotype as a stereotype and for what it's used and for what purpose it's used. Sometimes it's used for the purposes purely to entertain. Sometimes it's used for the purpose of manipulating people. And I think that, these anti-defamation groups have to take a look at, are they trying to manipulate, or are they just trying to entertain and not perceiving the wrong that they might be doing, or the attempt that they might be making in manipulating these images?
So let's use an example. I don't know, are you guys familiar with the Fiat commercial? British are coming?
Yes.
The British are coming! The British are coming! Wait, it's the Italians.
When I first saw it, I thought it was cute. Sure, it plays on, I don't know what it plays on. It plays on the,
fashion,
the Italian,
sexy.
it plays on fashion,
Yeah.
it plays on sex, and it plays on the Italian male possibly.
But it's a
being
great
whatever.
commercial. I would argue that it's a great commercial because, first of all, we're talking about it. Secondly, it shows this contrast between the Puritan culture and the European culture, which is a great big stereotype that even people from Hawthorne all the way up, all the writers have used this. Italy is the place where you go to have sex and tell people about it. In the United States, you have sex, but you don't tell anybody about it. And so, this sense of all of a sudden the Italians are going, we better start looking good. I mean, it plays on all that, fine, if the audience perceives it as this playfulness.
If the audience is informed.
If they're informed.
Yeah.
And there's a historical piece to that, right? Northern Europe versus Southern Europe, and these guys are going to come liven things up. I think it's interesting that I've heard a lot of negative comments about the commercial,
right.
especially about the portrayal of women in the commercial, and
Because they rip their skirts
because they
off.
rip their skirts off and they let their hair come down, and and they're just so thrilled about the car coming. But I can say very honestly, I want to buy a Fiat now.
This is going to be so much better than the Tea Party.
So this, and you said you've heard negative comments about it, and so have I. And this brings to, the sense of the Italian American community, unified, not unified, how unified is it, how unified should it be, and so on and so forth.
I don't think any ethnic community is unified. I mean, I think that what happens is some ethnic communities have better PR than others. So they're able to kind of keep things quieter that they don't want to allow out there. I mean, I think that's an important element in some cultures. And there are some cultures which just aren't in the limelight. I mean, how often do you hear about Greek Americans? Yet they're a very big force in this country. There's a lot going on in Greece right now that people should be aware of that's somewhat negative, and yet it's not really talked about very dramatically here. So my feeling about this is that we kind of have to do a better job putting forward the elements that we want and getting people to work together to do that. I mean, everyone seems to feel they want to be in charge of those images or what is said about Italian Americans, and it would be really nice if at some point folks just got that it would work better if we all worked together instead of kind of going at it separately, even when the message we have is the same. And it seems to me this is a big issue too.
I think also if the focus was on education and not on what our images, I mean, then they would be getting at the cause as opposed to the symptom of this, whatever it is that keeps us divided. I agree. I don't think that we need to be a unified force moving forward, everybody voting for the same political candidate. I mean, that could probably never happen. But what I do think can happen is that everybody can agree that there are certain aspects of Italian American culture that are not looked at, are not discussed, are not understood, and these need to be placed throughout the education system from kindergarten, preschool, all the way up through graduate school.
Well, in graduate school, it's happening at CUNY, as we know. It's happening both at undergraduate and graduate school, and in fact, Queens College in fall of, this coming academic year, it's 40 years that Italian American Studies exists as an undergraduate program, a minor, and if I'm not mistaken, it was the first program in the United States.
Absolutely, the first official. Yeah.
First official, yeah. May not be the first courses that were taught, but definitely the first formalized course of study.
Consolidated.
Right, and then we did our thing this past academic year by having the 4 courses at the graduate level in Italian American Studies get approved and now part of the
But
master's.
it's a shame that it took 40 years.
Well, it took 40 years.
to make it to the graduate level.
It took 40 years,
we
Hopefully,
did it.
Yeah, we got
Fred's
it.
earlier point about this, though, is still very important, that it shouldn't be just students who are going into the Italian American Studies program at either the undergraduate or graduate level who are taking it. Or there have to be elements of courses. There are so many diversity courses now at almost every university. There have to be elements in those courses, too. It can't just be in this corner so that not everyone can take advantage of it.
But,
well, the other thing, too, I mean, the way you take it out of the corner is you make it a general education.
Sure.
Make it fulfill general education requirements. And then if you write the courses in the what I think is the right way to write them, everybody can benefit. When I was teaching these courses at Stony Brook, I had 300 or 400 students in a course, and very few of them were Italian Americans. They were taking the course because it met a requirement, it met at a time that was convenient to them. So that there were other reasons other than being Italian American. In fact, I would be like very upset when some of the non-Italian Americans would score much higher on the exams than the Italian Americans did. I thought this should be a natural for these people. But I think that the sense of Italian American studies at all levels, but I think it's particularly important right now at the graduate level to start producing courses so that people who are going off and becoming the teachers, the future chairs of dissertation committees, the future chairs of the department, the future deans, have had a course in this, the 5th largest ethnic group in the United States.
I agree. I had a course, don't worry.
I hear you're taking Italian now, too.
Yes, I am, so.
All right. Alla prossima.
Never too late.
No,
Never
no,
too
no.
late. There was one other thing that I wanted to bring up, but it has to do with really the category of Italian Americans as affirmative action at CUNY. I think that we might save that for another program, and I think we can revisit it later in the fall. But I just wanted to know, you especially, Donna, are the current chair of the Italian American Faculty and Staff Advisory Council, which is an advisory council indeed to the John D. Callender Italian American Institute, of which this program is part in collaboration with CUNY TV. So I was just wondering if just some brief thoughts before we close.
Well, I think just very briefly, it is a very big topic, and I think, again, one needs to understand the history of how it happened. Because the history of how it happened is really a history of ethnics in New York. It's a history of European immigrants and how they're not all the same. And the City University, for a variety of reasons, some very legitimate, kind of skipped a generation, so to speak, in putting out a hand to help those who had not had educational advantages before. And up until the 1990s, Italian Americans were the third highest dropout rate group in high school. Right? The idea was you didn't finish high school. You went out and got a job. You worked in your parents' shop. So there was not a large presence in education at the undergraduate level. And you only have to walk into CUNY today to most campuses and see that that hasn't necessarily changed very dramatically. Certainly at the administrative level, the university dean level, I mean, they are not well represented, and that's because they weren't there before, so they couldn't move up through the ranks. And I think we have to be very careful moving into the future to make sure there are folks there to take those positions after I retire, after you retire, after Fred retires.
Well, yeah, that's the reason why Anthony and I have been working to develop programs not just here but around the world.
Right, exactly.
I mean, this is bigger than all of us.
And we are, in fact, working on that now. We're in the process of working on studying the latest results of the numbers with regard to Italian Americans as members of the faculty and staff within CUNY. And we should say that we were also able a couple of years ago to have CUNY begin counting once again Italian American students.
Yes, that was a major achievement, because that kind of tells you who's there now, who is going to come up through the ranks. And since we didn't know that, it was hard to make that judgment or say anything about it into the future.
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming in, and this is to be continued, whether it is here at CUNY TV or whether it is again in Rome with ILICA, the Italian Language Intercultural Alliance, and whether it's in Italian, we do it in Italian next time perhaps, or if we also do it in 2 languages. I want to thank you guys and enjoy the rest of the summer. Well, we hope you enjoyed this first episode of our original summer programming. Tune in next month for our conversation with Lucia Grillo and actor Michael Badalucco. For Italics, I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.